I fix stories for a living. Not the bedtime kind, or the sort anyone tells over drinks and then forgets. My stories wear classification stamps and chain of custody numbers. Generals read them before they testify, and lawyers quote them when they argue about who owns what piece of public memory. Most days, someone higher up sends me a compressed horror. An urban block seen from 6 drones, 7 helmet cams, traffic cameras, and a tourist's phone that stayed on the network when it should have been on airplane mode. The feeds never align. Bullets arrive out of order. A vehicle burns in one frame and rolls past intact in another. My job is to make sure one version survives. You can call that a service. I did for a while. People need a coherent chain if they want to go on living inside it. Courts need a timeline. Politicians need a version they can stand behind without getting too close. So I watch the feeds. I hunt frame drops, metadata tampering, delayed uploads. Then I turn the mess into a neat sequence, each cause clipped to its effect like beads on wire. I work for a section of defense intelligence that doesn't have a doorplate. On paper, we sit inside the office of the Director of National Intelligence under Strategic Information Integrity. In practice, we're who you call when reality refuses to cooperate with the briefing slide. On the morning the Black Pyramid arrived in the Mojave, my section chief woke me with an encrypted call and one sentence. "Archer, we have a domestic event, and the event resists recording." That line stuck. At the time, I took it for drama. People at my level hoard drama where they can. 6 hours later, I sat in the back of a transport heading toward Edwards, wearing borrowed desert khaki with someone else's name ghosts in marker across the faded fabric. The aircraft was a gutted cargo model, refitted with quick seating. No windows within reach. Plenty of time to think about other domestic events that had later faded out of any searchable archive. There was the refinery implosion outside Houston that turned into equipment failure in public reports, even though half the emergency responders recorded something in the sky that never matched a flight database. There was the mall hostage crisis in Ohio that played 3 different ways depending on which dispatch logs you trusted. Both times, my office did the cleanup. We shaved off the impossible edges until the story fit the world people thought they knew. I expected more of the same this time. More feeds, more lies. Maybe a piece of tech someone would later swear had never touched American soil. The ramp dropped with a hydraulic groan, and desert light spilled in. Heat followed like a physical mass, rolling along the floor, pushing through the thin soles of my boots. An Air Force lieutenant waited at the bottom with 2 security police. Practical build, buzzed head, tablet case under one arm. He checked my badge, checked the photo, checked the laminated emergency orders I held out. "Archer." He skimmed the print, then jerked his head towards the lot. "Vehicles this way." The vehicle was a tan SUV with mismatched panels and a cracked dash screen. Someone had taped a base map beside the steering wheel, then crossed it through with new lines in pen. We rolled past the usual airbase landscape, parked aircraft, fuel trucks, low buildings with peeling paint, then through a wire gate guarded by Army MPs who didn't salute the lieutenant and didn't quite meet his eyes. Past that, the base dropped the pretense of normal. Outside my window, the organized sprawl of Edwards gave way to something improvised. New barriers wrapped the roadway in layers that didn't match the taped map. The first line was plastic jersey walls and chain link with Homeland Security hazard signage zip-tied every few feet. The second was concrete T-walls in chevron, spray-painted with unit logos from Army MP companies that didn't belong here on paper. The third, deeper in, had a heavier tone. Blast-resistant modules stamped with the eagle and shield crest of Northern Command. In theory, Northcom handles Homeland Defense coordination. In practice, when their crest lands on a barrier, someone expects a jurisdictional knife fight. We slowed while a young MP in dust-pattern uniform circled with a mirror on a pole. Another came to my door. His vest carried both Army and DHS patches like no one had settled who owned him. Badge. He held out a gloved hand through my open window. I passed it over. His eyes moved across the branch name, the part that did and didn't exist, then flicked to the lieutenant in the front seat. "This one yours, sir." "For now." Tension rode in the way the kid shifted his weight, the small slide that clears your weapon hand. Somewhere behind the checkpoint, raised voices argued over radio handsets about clearances and chains of command. We rolled through. More barriers, more uniforms. Air Force security forces with their berets. A Homeland Security rapid response team in heavy vests. A knot of men in plain clothes with earpieces, sunglasses straight out of a federal special agent catalogue. Everyone had a perimeter. No one trusted the others enough to relax. Beyond the last line, deserts stretched out in beige infinity. Scrubby plants, low ridges in the distance, heat mirage hitching up the horizon. The sky had that bleached look it gets when the sun means harm. Then the ground ended. About a kilometer out from the last barrier, the land stopped at a clean line, as if a county-sized laser had cut a wedge out of the Mojave and dropped it into a different file. Beyond the cut stood the pyramid. I'd seen satellite captures on the flight in, grainy zooms that couldn't decide whether the thing reflected radar. None of them prepared me for how it sat in the world. It didn't rise from the sand. It occupied the space where the desert should have continued, as if the land had always contained a perfectly dark geometric absence, and someone had simply restored the opacity. The faces were so black they flattened distance. The join between plane and sky slipped out of the eye's grasp. The edges hurt your focus, straight lines that made your gaze flinch sideways. We stopped at a forward command trailer cluster, white boxes around a larger tent complex. Generators thumped in staggered rhythm. Cables snaked across packed ground like someone had tried to wire the earth. A man in a short-sleeved dress shirt and government tie waited at the trailer door. Thin frame, silver creeping into his hair at the temples, lanyard with the kind of badge you only see when everyone on site already counts as cleared family. "Archer." He offered a hand. "Cole, I'm your handler for this exercise." No agency acronym on his badge, just the intelligence community seal. The office inside the office, the one on the DNI org chart you learn about only after you start erasing entries on other charts. Inside the trailer, air conditioning fought the heat and managed a lukewarm surrender. Cool enough that you couldn't blame the machinery, warm enough to resent it. Cole led me past a rack of servers, a knot of analysts at a central table, and a wall plastered with printouts. The pyramid from different angles, annotated with arrows and notes. Network maps, comms traffic, a short list of phrases underlined in red. Situation. He eased into briefing rhythm. 3 nights ago, an object manifested in the test range. The site records a clean interval, no launch profile, no impact signature, no approach on any sensor. A contractor had a fixed time-lapse camera on a construction project nearby. The dune field compresses like dough under its own weight. Then the object occupies the cleared space across roughly 6 seconds of footage. Any tampering? One brow lifted. "We sent it to your shop. Your director signed off as clean." No one had mentioned that part. Normal. From the outside, my office looks like a maze. Requests run through 3 cover units and come back wearing different names. "Northcom holds ground security," Cole went on. "Our compartment has the anomalous tech lead and the bigger question of narrative stability." That phrase already sat on a wall chart in neat block letters. Narrative stability. It sounded like something a public affairs major wrote at 2 a.m. "Your role," he continued, "is primary narrative forensics on all interior excursions. You watch everything. You tag divergences and sketch classification frameworks so we can understand what the object shows us, and more importantly, what it does." The hairs on my neck twitched at that last clause. What it does. He watched my face, waiting to see which question I'd choose first. You told me on the call the event resists recording. The working group phrasing says it has opinions. He tilted his head toward a side door. Come see the proof of concept. We stepped out the far side of the trailer into a cleared lane aimed directly at the south face of the pyramid. From here, with more scale in my periphery, the faces resolved into more than abstract planes. Every visible square meter held low-relief carvings, dense with grooves and raised islands. My brain hunted for familiar alphabets, cuneiform wedges, hieroglyphic birds, Maya knots, Chinese strokes. None fit. The patterns evoked layered circuit traces more than any human script. Analogy slipped. The lines belonged to a concept of writing that had never taken the same evolutionary tumbles as ours. A group waited at the forward mark. Half a dozen scientists in mismatched field gear, an Air Force security element, and a tech team fussing with equipment cases on a folding table. At ease, Doctor. Cole's tone with them turned brisk, proprietary. Run Archer through the basic behavior. A short man with a lab scissor beard stepped out from the cluster. His badge read, Fowler, Los Alamos. He woke his tablet with a thumb. All right, theater time. He gave me a quick look. You people like to see it yourself. He gestured to a corporal with the lean bearing of someone who'd worn body armor most of his life. The corporal slung a small pack. Cables ran from it to cameras on his helmet and chest rig. One of the techs checked a handheld and flashed a thumbs up. Cameras live, Fowler narrated. Feed streams to the trailer, recorded on redundant local storage. The corporal walked out in a straight line. The base around us blurred into backdrop. All attention rushed toward the perfect plane he approached. He crossed a mark scratched in the dirt, someone's comfort line. The air in front of the pyramid's face tightened, a pressure with no clear name. The carvings within his path began to move. They didn't slide or iris away like shutters. They loosened. Stone shed its commitment to solidity, its lines relaxing into a phase that didn't belong in the language of matter. The area in front of the corporal's chest camera turned less object and more argument. He took one more step. The wall resolved around him into an open passage. One moment, unbroken face. The next, a rectangular void the size of a heavy door frame, opening into a narrow corridor of the same impossible black. I'd watched enough trick footage for a career. I knew how seamless cuts can get. Nothing here fit that draw. No suggestion of hinges, no rotation, no element I could track as moving part. The pyramid simply disclosed a passage it had carried all along. Stop there, Fowler said. Hold. The corporal froze with his boots half a meter over the threshold, upper body inside the corridor, legs still in desert air. Fowler glanced at a tech. Power down the pack. The tech thumbed a control. The little indicator light by the corporal's shoulder went dark. The corridor sealed. No sound, no visible motion. The edges that had pretended to frame an opening rejoined into featureless plane. Stone trespassed through the space his torso should have occupied. He staggered back with a half-strangled oath, hands flying to his chest as if expecting rock. Nothing had touched him. The geometry of the world had interrupted the gap and restored itself. The cameras on his rig looked inert. No status lights. Fowler walked closer, stopping well short of the mark. We've repeated this with different sensors, he reported. Optical, LiDAR, magnetic imagers, disposable bore probes. Any powered recorder triggers an opening. Disable or remove the gear and the surface resolves as if it had always been continuous. Cole turned slightly to watch me. It opens for recording, he remarked, echoing my orders. Somewhere in my hindbrain, a thought slotted into place. Of course it does. A structure that edits reality treats observation as a kind of right permission. They powered up the pack again. The rig's lights winked on. The pyramid, neat and eager, opened once more. Command's first instinct was to cut power and keep away. Fowler tilted his tablet to show earlier footage. Same entrance behavior from different angles, each stamped with a different time. Then they calmed down and decided to send a team inside before rumors reached anyone who doesn't belong here. That's where you come in, Archer. You can watch their first run now, then join the next. Cole passed me a ruggedized tablet loaded with my office's usual frameworks. Flags for source reliability, divergence categories, confidence levels. They all looked small. "We've got one more thing before you go in," he added. "The initial walkthrough. You'll make more sense of what you're about to see if you know how wrong it gets." He led me back into the trailer, into a smaller compartment behind a blackout curtain. A handful of chairs, a large screen on a bracket, a pot of coffee gone dull and oily hours ago. 2 others waited there. A woman in an Air Force intel patch, eyes shadowed by too much screen time, and a civilian with infantry posture. Both watched me like people who'd lost some certainty and wanted a trade. Cole dimmed the light and cued the composite. The first clip showed helmet cams synced with chest rigs and overhead drone. Whoever compiled it had stabilized the view and aligned timestamps. My own people would have done the same. The entrance matched what I'd just watched. Wall softening, corridor phasing into relevance, professional voices over comms. Then they stepped inside. At first, the interior looked like a neutral chamber. Black walls, same dense, unreadable relief. The team moved in controlled diamond formation, barrels dipping and rising as their arcs cleared. Headlamps threw white cones into a darkness that swallowed them without much interest. Then the walls moved. Relief elements pushed outward as if hungry for depth. Figures sharpened. Architecture budgeted itself into existence. In seconds, the chamber had become a street. The feeds filled with city geometry, shop fronts, upper windows, streetcar tracks, scaffolding. Above, signage in serif fonts from some cousin of the 1930s. Crowds pressed past, invisible to the team, but fully rendered on the recording. Helmets turned to track pedestrians who inhabited the footage only. The analyst beside me muttered a curse. She'd probably seen this 20 times. At first glance, the scene looked like a lower Manhattan library reel. Canyon Avenue, shoulder-high stone facades climbing to bright tops. Then the wrongness surfaced. Banners between buildings bore unfamiliar slogans. Civic posters carried English text that almost matched ours, yet skewed. Traffic lights held an extra signal. License plates wore a heraldic seal where I expected a state name. "Note the insignia." Cole's voice carried like a commentary track. "Comparative analysts ran this against every cityscape we have. Near miss to New York. Underlying civic architecture belongs to a polity that never existed here." In the overhead drone window, the street showed a single clean version. Bodies moved with ordinary consistency. In the raw headcam stream, edges overlapped. Layers of street life slid through one another like stacked transparencies sharing volume without a clear landlord. On the third replay of a corner, a streetcar gliding through people who half acknowledged it. Something high beyond the rooftop snagged my eye. Pause. Cole froze the frame. Above a park's analog, perched at the limit of resolution on a tower crown, a tiny black pyramid sat in the skyline like a dark jewel. "Your team saw this?" Slater, the infantry-built civilian, leaned in. "We did. Same geometry appears across scenarios, sometimes closer, sometimes far." The composite rolled on. Next branch, a salt beach. Steel grey water, landing craft wakes, tracer arcs in tidy curves. Men in boats, helmets low, rifles clutched. Normandy in emotional shape, but the details refused to submit. Helmets carried insignia I didn't recognize. Fortifications on the bluffs looked like abstract sculpture, blocks without personality. Weapons resembled machine guns described to someone who'd never handled one. In haze above the far cliffs, a pyramid form lingered, scaled to sit like a watchful animal beyond the fighting. Then a motorcade through a hybrid capital from no known atlas. Skyline mixing styles from 3 continents. A man in the lead car moved with head of state ease, his face unfamiliar. Flags snapped on fenders, thick cloth in heavy wind, designs that might have been cousins to the American flag if history had folded differently. The shot came tracked from 4 angles with obscene clarity. The bullet's path stretched in slow motion. Concrete burst. Blood carved a precise arc. On a hill behind the plaza, between anonymous stone blocks, another pyramid rested, the height of mid-rise buildings tucked into the background like punctuation. "Stop," I murmured. The frame held on bodyguards half-reached, half-shielding themselves. The moment lingered longer than the editor really wanted. The tell of someone who couldn't cut away. I opened my mouth, knowing exactly how my own job looked now. A man trained to choose which version of a disaster the record will call true. "What am I naming exactly?" I turned toward Cole. "Simulations, reconstructions, forecasts?" "You'll generate the category terms." His smile carried no humor. "Whatever labels you choose will anchor how higher command talks about this. We need a practical framework. Foreign tech, psychological weapon, contact from outside human history? We don't expect you to decide alone. We do expect you to be clear about what we're seeing." He wanted nouns for something that might not care about nouns. Reflex pushed up. "Assume a mundane origin. Someone built it. Maybe advanced training hardware from an adversary. Maybe a quantum slab someone dropped here on purpose." Another part of me, the part that had watched battle footage refuse to settle into one chain, felt a different pull. Professional greed. If there's an ultimate test for a man who tidies broken narratives, it looks like this. "All right," I exhaled. "I can start flagging, but I need to see it myself if you want more than second-hand impressions." Cole nodded. "Gear up. You're on the next entry." He steered me into a staging tent lined with armor racks, helmets, portable sensors, batteries. A medic checked my vitals. A tech fitted a compact camera unit and handed me a recorder the size of an old cassette deck. "Use this for live commentary." The tech adjusted the strap. "Anything you mark syncs timestamps across feeds." On my way out, I caught my reflection in a dark monitor. Late 30s, close-cropped hair retreating at the temples, eyes edged by sleepless creases. A face more at home in back rooms than on any podium. Outside, the pyramid waited without expression. I slid the recorder's mic near my mouth. Name: Archer Daniel. Position: Narrative Forensics. Subject: Initial entry: Mojave Anomalous Structure. Reality doesn't care what label I use. The thought finished and the world twitched. Carvings along our path brightened, ink waking under a fingertip. Grooves deepened, contrast rose. The track through the desert, which had felt like a scratched corridor, now suggested a throat. I walked with the team, boots leaving dust, then touching something else. The structure opened under powered eyes. Crossing the threshold felt less like stepping through a door and more like someone editing my surroundings mid-stride. One moment, sky, sand, concrete, and human hardware framed my vision. The next, that backdrop fell away. The neutral chamber greeted us, black planes packed with new glyphs. The patterns had grammar. The lexicon escaped me. Our team lead, a compact major who looked born in running shoes, signed a wedge formation. Barrels angled out, sensors rotated. My own headlamp clicked on. The darkness in front of us didn't just lack light. It gave off a deliberate, matte refusal to return anything. Then the walls woke. Shapes extruded from the relief, guiding us. A flat section swelled into a perpendicular surface, carving out what my brain insisted on calling a corridor. We walked. Half a dozen steps in, the right wall surged outward. Black lines melted together and reassembled as stone blocks the color of wet ash. The floor under my boots shifted from smooth to chipped paving. We stepped into a busy street. Sound hit. Wheels on tracks, layered voices, vendors calling out numbers and goods in unfamiliar patterns. I turned slowly. The city around us wore an early 20th century skin. Horse carts shared asphalt with squat motorcars trailing exhaust. Overhead wires tangled the sky. Posters advertised products and politicians I'd never heard of. A tram bell chimed, sharp and bright, over a desert that no longer existed here. In the tiny preview of my own feed on the visor, the scene displayed as one coherent world. People had weight and shadow. Crowds negotiated space the way crowds do. With my naked eyes, more than one reality tried to live in the same coordinates. Maybe it was the angle of my gaze or the way my attention slid. A storefront window flashed 3 interiors as I passed. A bakery with glass cases of pastries I couldn't name. A campaign office with stacks of pamphlets featuring a woman in a severe jacket. A shuttered convenience store with a roll-down gate halfway closed. The longer I tried to hold all layers at once, the more my mind performed triage and chose one runner per glance. In my ear, the major kept a calm commentary, calling bearings and cues. I spoke into the recorder. Scenario Alpha, urban environment. Surface resemblance to early mid-20th century New York analog. Deviations, unfamiliar civic symbols, English language slogans with divergent party alignments, overhead rails absent from recorded Manhattan infrastructure. That deeper part of me tugged my gaze upward. Past laundry lines and banners, above rooftops that grew more ornate the longer I looked, a small pyramid lurked beyond the park's cousin, scaled to mid-rise height. Additional note, I breathed. Primary object appears inside scenario as background structure at approximate position, corresponding to northern Manhattan. Scale matches mid-rise, likely emblematic insertion. We moved. People drifted through us. A woman in a long coat bore down on our formation, attention on a companion ahead. She never altered course. Her body merged with my shoulder and slid on through, leaving no sensation. In the recording, I knew, the software would choose who yielded and commit. The pyramid offered power a clean shot at picking which history remained. We passed under a streetlight whose globe held metallic petals instead of a bulb. The light carried a faint blue cast unknown to our own era's fixtures. A referendum poster on a brick corner screamed about unified mandate authority and urged citizens to prefer the course that preserves honor. Fonts and layout felt more modern than the brickwork and horse carts. Note phrase "prefer the course" in political language, I muttered for the recorder. Watch for recurrence. We followed the major's sign into a side alley. Noise dulled to a background murmur. The alley dead-ended in smooth black panels, the texture back from the neutral chamber. The city folded away. Panels widened, stretched, and in 2 breaths we stood on the assault beach from the briefing. Water, waves, landing craft grinding toward grey sand. The air carried neutral temperature, yet spray flicked across my cheeks with convincing pattern, and wet sand gave half an inch under my boots. Scenario Beta, I narrated. Amphibious landing, mid-20th century tech analog. Equipment and insignia do not match any known belligerents. Fortifications lack recognizable engineering signatures. Background object sits beyond cliffs. The small pyramid on the horizon kept its distance, a fixed point outside artillery range. Static rasped, then Slater's voice. Archer, lock on that helmet emblem and tag it as either political or military. We want to see what it does. I focused on one soldier, helmet canted right. A dark, 3-stroke wing shape marked the side. Tagging as military unit insignia. The soldier's body rewound half a second and replayed with a slightly altered path. The wing emblem sharpened, duplicated onto his shoulder patch and the landing craft's hull. Nice, it heard you. Fowler's voice crackled through. We can test other framings later. Move on. The rest of that rotation blurred into catalogue. Room after room, scenario after scenario. Some hugged our own history with unnerving proximity. Others felt like fever dreams about worlds where the deck of geology and politics had been shuffled. Back outside, desert glare punched my eyes. I lifted my helmet and squinted at what passed for baseline. Something felt wrong. At first I chalked it up to fatigue. Time dilates in intense environments. People come out of long engagements and find the clock outside has done something private. Then I saw the barriers. On my first walk from observation lane to trailers, the outermost ring had worn Northcombe's eagle on every T-wall. Now the logos on those heavy units showed only a contractor's mountain range brand. I stopped and scanned the line. Same pattern, end to end. I waved down an army staff sergeant. "You all swap out barriers in the last hour." I pointed at the logo. He frowned. "Those came on the first day, sir. Same contractor we use at Peterson." "Why?" "I remember Northcombe crests. Maybe you're mixing sites." He shrugged and moved on, no trace of deception. In his world, these walls had always looked like this. Inside the trailer, I went hunting. Procurement logs eventually loaded through the molasses of secure networks. The file showed an order placed months ago with the contractor, whose logo now ringed us. I checked my tablet notes from the first approach. Where I remembered writing Northcom branded T-walls, my handwriting now read contractor walls with Northcom presence. Same green ink, same hand. The phrase didn't match the memory behind it. A headache pressed behind my eyes like misaligned lenses. On a map overlay, I pulled up the nearest civilian town, the one we'd flown past inbound. The name felt wrong, close to something I knew, but an extra letter had crept in or an old one had vanished. I stared until the screen blurred. An analyst passed behind me with coffee, glanced at the map. "You ever been out there?" he asked. I could have sworn it had a different name when I was at Nellis. 10, 12 years back. He shook his head. "Guess I'm misremembering. This work gets in your brain." He moved on. I opened a new file and started writing everything down. Not just what the pyramid showed, but what the outside world claimed about itself. Trust shifted from impressions to paper. Days blurred, then refused to stay fused. We went inside, came back with footage and questions, tried to braid sequences into a timeline, and watched those braids fray as the world outdoors quietly revised itself around our notes. Inside, scenarios gained weight. At first they felt like expensive VR, good enough for training or amusement, still short of reality's surplus detail. Then something edged over. In one urban segment, dust left a faint line on my glove when I brushed brick. On a battlefield, recoil from a nearby rifle seeped into my bones, even though I stood half a step outside the shooter's frame. In a rural village, the creak of a swing's chain carried the right lag and vibration for old metal and long weather. We built a recurring joke. Every city-scale or battlefront scenario hid at least one pyramid. Some loomed in plazas, some perched in distant mountains. Tiny ones appeared on coins in logos as desk paperweights. "This thing runs more like a franchise than an artifact," Slater grumbled in one debrief. Outside, edits picked up. One morning I walked into the main command tent and stopped at the central table. The base commander I remembered, a colonel with a too-firm handshake and a lecture about rules of engagement, had evaporated. In his place, a general in his 50s with salt in his hair bent over aerials, conferring with majors and civilians. No one looked surprised to see him. Officers moved with the unconscious rhythm of habits built under this man. I caught a captain from ops I'd briefed the day before. "Where's Colonel Rayburn?" I asked. He blinked. "Who?" "Base CO, about your height, darker hair, chews his thumb when he stares at maps." The captain's expression shifted into polite concern. "Sir, General Havers has commanded this from stand-up. Maybe you're thinking of Dugway." He checked his tablet as we talked. An order template filled the screen, complete with Havers' signature block dated weeks back. I retreated. In my paper notebook, the entry for CO ended after a capital C and a couple of loops, my pen stroke broken, ink faint like an old scar. No name. I added in fresh ink, "Remember prior CO as Colonel Rayburn, no record on site." Later in the chow line, the flag over the compound caught my eye. I watched it longer than a flag deserves. The field of stars belonged to a different country than the one I'd grown up in. I counted, twice. Habit kept trying to correct the pattern. When I forced myself to mark each star, the total came up 3 short. I pointed as a young sergeant passed with a tray. New design? I kept it casual. We streamline the union and forget to tell anyone? He laughed. Same flag as ever, sir. He moved on. In my bunk, I pulled a secure encyclopedia entry. The flag in the photo matched the pole outside. The text traced a state history that fit that star count, complete with admission dates and amendments I'd never tried to memorize because they didn't exist last week. I checked entries for old campaigns where I'd watched medals pinned. Boundaries and honors showed slight adjustments. Names of operations shifted by a word here, a location there. My phone, locked down by policy, still held a handful of personal photos. The quick shot I'd taken of the perimeter on day 1, a habit for my own note-taking, now showed contractor-branded barriers, no eagles. Another thumbnail refused to load properly. When I tapped it, the expanded view showed grey blocks and ghost lines that might once have sketched an eagle. Copying that file to my tablet threw an incompatible format error. Around then, bodies started changing. We had a captain liaison from a unit that cleared IEDs in the Middle East. First day I met him, over coffee, he had eased off the glove on his myoelectric prosthetic to scratch his stump and joked about phantom itches. On the 5th day I saw him heading for the perimeter with a squad and called his name. He turned and lifted a hand to wave. Flesh knuckles, both sides. You all right, Archer? You had a prosthetic. He chuckled. I've got plenty of things I wish I didn't, but that isn't one. He flexed both hands, knuckles whitening. Couple of shrapnel scars, sure, nothing missing. Your record shows attached extremities. He grinned. You okay? You look like you saw a ghost in your own mirror. Medical humoured me with a full workup. X-rays, blood, nerve conduction. His file recorded nerve trauma in the left forearm from years back, treated in theatre, no amputation. I leaned against the exam bay door afterward. A medic with a braided bracelet at his wrist scrolled his tablet. You expected an amputation, he observed. I remember one. Through the observation window, the captain sat on the bed, flexing both hands, wiggling fingers like a kid. Anything on phantom sensations? He reported occasional tingling in the left hand on intake. The medic frowned. We marked it as nerve irritation. You think it's something else? I think the world's doing a long, slow gaslight. He gave me an uncertain half smile, unsure if I meant it as a joke. By week's end, medical opened a new category. Subjective history incongruent with documentation. It filled quickly. One entry belonged to a National Guard sergeant from a farm town about 100 miles away. He threw himself into perimeter rotations with the resigned energy of someone done with harvests. After his 3rd trip inside as sensor escort, his speech started fraying. We stood in the chow line when he mentioned home. Franklin, he told someone. Small town, everyone knows everyone. Grain elevators, 2 stoplights, same cop for 30 years. East of here, I asked. North by the river. He frowned. You know. Show me on a map later. He never did. Medical called me down instead. He sat on an exam bed, boots dangling, hands turned palm up. They don't match, he muttered as I came in. What doesn't? Scars. He tapped a pale line on his right forearm. I know this one. Barbed wire as a kid. But this... He turned his arm, showed a crescent along a tendon. No idea. My mom never told that story. I remember it hurting. Remember not crying because my uncle watched. Only I don't have an uncle in this world. The neurologist's write-up avoided phrases like, this world, but the content didn't. Layered recall of towns absent from current maps. Phrases in near languages. No bleeding, no tumours, brain waves too busy, like 2 data streams stacked. That night, with the flag still wrong and the phantom limb restored, I stood in a narrow strip of darkness between 2 trailers. The desert stretched beyond the light, ignorant. A civilian stepped into the same strip, already shaking a lighter. His badge caught a stray beam. Dr. Oxley, Applied Mathematics and Linguistic Structures. He glanced over as flame flared. Your Archer, the story repairman. I've heard worse job titles. He drew smoke and let it out. You keep watching the flag. It keeps shifting, I answered before I could wrap it in humor. Stars? 3 shy of my count. I'm 4 over, he remarked. On day 1, the field looked crowded. We watched the cloth snap. Commander, he asked after a beat. First day, who greeted you? Colonel Rayburn. Tall, nervous talker. Brigadier from the Guard, grey hair, crushing handshake, told me my math might finally matter here. Oxley's mouth twitched. He hasn't existed for at least 3 days. Files show General Havers from Go. Perimeter contractor. 2 different names for me before this one. Neither matches what I saw day 1. He flicked ash. Town down the highway. I remember one vowel. The map shows another. Then we're both crazy, or reality lost version control. He held out a hand. Some of us compare notes. We call ourselves anchors. Anchors to what? That's the fun part. His eyes held the sharp glint of a man clinging to a puzzle, even as dread gnawed the edges. None of us share the same baseline. Anchors met where cameras couldn't see. On paper, a perimeter like this covers every blind spot. In practice, mix 3 services, Homeland Security, several labs, and a compartment allergic to limits, and seams appear. Oxley and a few others had already mapped them. The first meeting I attended took place in a half-unpacked supply tent listed as vehicle maintenance. Shelves held boxed filters and oversized wrenches. A beat-up fan pushed hot air in circles. Archer, Oxley gestured me in. This is Dr. Kelvin, materials, Slater, Carver, cognitive testing, salt, comms and data integrity. We sat on crates and buckets, halfway between conspiracy cell and group therapy. Oxley pulled a tablet from a foil bag and brought up a grid. We've all passed through the pyramid multiple times, he began. We all carry objective discrepancies between early memories and the current world. We started logging them. Rows are people. Columns are reference points. Flags mean your recollection diverges from today's record. He turned the screen. The chart listed items down one side. Flag, commander, town name, perimeter branding, Houston refinery outcome, election year X. Along the other axis, initials. No row matched another. Where I remembered Rayburn, Kelvin had female colonel, name starting with K. Where Oxley recalled a brigadier, I left the cell blank. Salt remembered a different news report about a shuttle disaster, but the rest of us aligned with the current record. Slater recalled a supply depot bombing that never occurred here. My own history agreed with the branch we stood in. Oxley tapped a box. This is the flag, he said. You mark 3 fewer stars than current. I mark 4 more, different arrangement. Slater's got 5 more in a different pattern. So we walked in carrying different worlds, I noted. That's our working assumption. Carver rubbed his thumb along cratewood. The pyramid doesn't just revise a single history. It appears to adjust from a map of many drafts. People arrived here with diverged backgrounds. The edits we feel look like convergence towards some preferred course. The phrase from the referendum poster slid into place. Out there, I gestured toward the black mass beyond canvas. We walk through those other drafts. We think so. Oxley spread fresh printouts of glyphs, and outside adapts as we interact. Close up, the carvings lost some mystique and turned into puzzle fragments. We mapped recurring clusters against scenario types. He tapped a sequence. These 6 show up around major military engagements. This bracket appears in scenes with unknown continents or coastlines. These 3, nested squares, cluster near events our history finds morally toxic. Genocides, coups, disasters. They function like edit marks. Proofreading, Slater murmured. We've also drilled below the pyramid, Kelvin added. Core samples down to about 1 kilometer show tool marks and geometry like the object's skin. Stratigraphy dates the workings to an era far older than human existence, maybe older than hominids entirely. So we rent space in an older building, Salt said. Oxley leaned forward. Remember the Houston refinery? He asked. Big civilian casualties, investigations. Archer's shop cleaned that one. I remembered. Flames around stacks, twisted steel and bone. Current public record calls it freak equipment failure. Oxley flipped to screenshots. Early responder logs mentioned lights in the sky, odd vibrations. Most of those accounts have gone revised, redacted, lost. A copy of the original dispatch sits in Salt's offline archive. It doesn't match what you get now. We found glyphs on the site. Salt spread photos of scorched metal bearing black marks that belonged to no machine. The same editorial signature, Carver murmured. So, I rubbed my forehead. We have a structure that shows alternate histories and adjusts ours. It reacts to how we describe what it shows. The more we engage, the more edits surface. You pick versions for a living, Oxley reminded me quietly. Tell me you don't see a pattern. Patterns in carvings became shared obsession. Oxley and Kelvin lived in front of high-res scans, sketching correspondences and building what they called a proto-lexicon. The rest of us tagged glyph sequences from interior runs. One cluster kept reappearing near scenes involving us. The Mojave base, its commanders, the flag shifts. A loop intersected by 3 strokes, always next to a small spiral. Oxley nicknamed it Correction Authorized. It shows up near scenarios where the pyramid favors one outcome over others, he said. Where a coup fails instead of succeeds. Where a plague stays contained. Where a war starts later. Another group looked at planetary imagery from certain rooms. Occasionally the viewpoint lifted high enough to show whole continents. Red pen on maps marked deviations from our Earth. An east-west mountain range where north-south should run. An island off a western coast that lacks one here. A river curling through desert that dries unbroken in our branch. It edits geology, Kelvin muttered. Not just politics. In a few scenes, the camera climbed to something like orbit. Constellations lay slightly out of place. Familiar patterns stretched or shifted. Everywhere in those skies, pyramids perched on land, sea, or impossible balance points between worlds and stars. The pyramid responded when we tried to explain it. We learned that by accident. During a run focused on politics around the wing emblem, Slater lost patience and addressed the air. "Make up your mind," he complained, pointing at a stone arch with a banner. "State symbol or religion? Pick." My recorder caught his framing. The room flickered. The arch banner deepened, then split into 2 variants. In one, the emblem sat austere above troops. In the other, it blazed in a mass rally with hymns. The wall reshaped into a sequence. A crowded square full of worshippers chanting under a sanctified wing. A legislative chamber with the wing tucked into a quiet corner. An abandoned temple where the same emblem lay chipped in dust. The effect read like an answer. The symbol could be many things, but once voices declared it religious, certain paths unfolded and others collapsed. Later, Salt pulled current news. "I don't remember this schism," he muttered, scrolling through coverage of a new faith faction in a country that, in my earlier memory, had kept religion at arm's length. The rhetoric borrowed phrases too close to what we'd heard inside. Oxley pointed to a glyph cluster. "That one showed up heavily in there," he noted. "Same set we've mapped loosely to branch accepted." The implication sat between us. We influenced the editor. Carver's tests on me grew more elaborate. We spent hours in a quiet room where he flashed images, dates, phrases. My job? Describe what each belonged to. "First deployment," he prompted one afternoon. I closed my eyes. Accessing memory wasn't the problem. Picking one was. In my strongest early track, I deployed to Iraq in my early 20s as a signals analyst with a brigade out of Fort Lewis. I talked slowly. Our base was an old factory near a city whose street map never matched satellites because a highway project got abandoned halfway. "And your death," Carver cut in. I opened my eyes. "What?" "You remember dying in that branch?" His tone stayed gentle. "Earlier you described a collapse. Walk it again." I did. Rubble, rebar across a chest that refused another breath. Day turned into a sheet of dust, a voice over radio fading in and out. The flat realization: this ends here. I also remembered clawing my way out of that building, lungs afire, body intact. I remembered getting home, leaving the army early, using the benefits. A doctorate, chalk dust, students with more opinions than knowledge. Watching some of the same wars on screens. In the branch that owned my current records, I went instead from enlisted signal work into intelligence. No doctorate, no marriage, no divorce. "So you're carrying at least 3 distinct life paths," Carver said. "Those are just the named ones," I answered. "Give me time and I'll probably find a dentist in Vermont in here." His eyes held that mix of curiosity and horror I'd seen in mortuary doctors. "Most people settle into one narrative and suppress the rest," he observed. "You're retaining contradictions and tracking which memory belongs to which branch." "Occupational hazard." I shrugged. "Hold enough conflicting feeds at once, you stop panicking when they don't match." He wrote that down. "Or predisposition," he mused. "Maybe the talent drew the assignment." Cole read the report and looked at me like a hazardous collectible. "You occupy a unique position," he told me in a quiet office. "Edits don't fully overwrite for you. That makes you valuable. It also makes you dangerous. Because I remember drafts you'd rather forget. Because you can destabilize the course we settle on." Preferred course had left a referendum poster and settled into his vocabulary. Outside our little tent of contraband conversations, the world slid. News stories referenced committees and offices that hadn't existed last week. The Exogenic Contact Protocol Committee, once a speculative line in a think tank paper, now appeared as a modest interagency group with archived pressers and a harmless logo. School curriculum samples showed corrected events. Atrocities I'd reconstructed in detail now appeared as smaller incidents, with fewer dead and more ambiguity. Consumer culture sprouted a new electronics brand, with a triangle and line mark. It came with retro designs stretching back decades. Old consoles on auction sites carried its logo. Sponsorship banners at sporting events in archived footage wore its colors. The same brand popped up on billboards inside the pyramid. Houston no longer stood alone. The patches spread across the quilt. One evening we overlaid panoramic captures from a dozen interior scenes. Every Earth-like world in those composites displayed pyramids, slim towers, sprawling obsidian tumors, dark moons fixed over cities. Oxley traced circles with his pen. "See this column?" He pointed to glyphs we'd glossed as archive or library. "Shows up around scenes with many near-identical copies of an event." He tapped another jagged cluster. "This one we struggled with." Then Salt spotted it next to a little planet icon with multiple outlines. "Best guess, something like preferred course achieved." And this extra squiggle beside it pops up where the planet still shows more than one outline afterward. He looked up. "That mark sits on worlds where internal interference complicated convergence. Locals pushed back. No one corrected his use of worlds." The fan creaked in the heat. "We're not protagonists," Salt muttered. "Civilizations don't sit center stage. We're one line in an archive." I'd spent my adult life choosing which version of other people's dead would get the official line. The scale here made that work feel like adjusting captions while the museum burns. Arguments about what to do with the pyramid sharpened as our glyph reading improved. Northcom's interest drifted from containment toward leverage. Senior officers arrived in crisp uniforms, moving with the ease of people escorted through other people's bureaucracy. They pulled me into a modular conference room. A 3-star general, 2 colonels, Cole and several think tank civilians sat around a table. A big screen looped interior clips, set-piece battles, diplomatic halls, riot scenes. From our vantage, the 3-star began. This object functions as both information weapon and opportunity. It presents alternate historical tracks, adversaries rising differently, conflicts in other theaters, alliances forming or failing. If we can map which starting conditions lead to which outcomes, we can steer toward favorable dominance scenarios. He spoke as if adjusting procurement, not reality. He clicked a remote. The screen split between 2 variants. In one, a US analog staggered through a humiliating defeat. In the other, its counterpart navigated a diplomatic maze into bloodless victory. "This is branch stabilization," he continued. "Some drafts favor us, others don't. The artifact appears to value stability. A hegemonic power stabilizes. We intend to ensure that power remains ours." "Assuming it buys that script," I said. "That's where you enter." One civilian leaned forward, eager. "You're framing influences which variance the interior resolves into. Your voice registers. We want you to help narrate key forks in ways that align with continued primacy. You want patriotic stories read into something that edits continents." The general held my gaze. "We want clarity. Chaos breeds enemies. An unstable archive benefits no one." In a different office, deeper in intel, Cole introduced me to a quieter circle. No uniforms, just professional clothes and the tired confidence of off-camera power. "DNI Shadow," Cole said. "We manage consistency." A tall man with wire-frame glasses spoke for them. "Our interest lies less in which flag dominates and more in preserving a coherent ground for any flag," he said. "A world where groups remember incompatible histories collapses into madness and sectarian war. You see early signs in your sergeant with layered scars and in your own condition." He tapped my file. "The artifact pushes toward convergence. Helping it complete that might prevent permanent fracture. A clean, self-consistent second history, even if it discards drafts, may be kinder than infinite personalized truth. You want to help it overwrite us. We want to avoid a planet where no 2 people agree on what happened last year." He steepled his fingers. "Your extra histories would only impede that. Ideally, you help guide the artifact toward maximal coherence, then we assist you in letting go of the rest. For your comfort as much as anyone's. Lobotomy as retirement package." His expression didn't shift. "We're offering peace." Back in the anchor tent, the mood had moved from curiosity to resistance. "We can't turn this into a weaponized press office for reality," Oxley paced. "Not for one flag, not for coherence. Some truths need to stand. People need to know we're capable of certain horrors, or we'll repeat them." "You're assuming one stable truth exists," Carver countered. "Our chart shows no single original. Each of us walked in from a different branch. Which ugly version do you want locked in?" "We see overlaps," Slater said. "Genocides, wars, systemic crimes. I saw a branch where a campaign that resembles the worst one we know got crushed early. That world looked gentler. And yet you're anchored to one where it ran full length," Oxley shot back, refusing to let him euphemize. "You recall it. You know the cost. Erase it and you spare future pain at the price of lying on a planetary scale." Kelvin cleared his throat. "There's another path," he said. "We try to break it." Heads turned. "Not with explosives," he clarified. "That just triggers something we don't understand. I mean, overload its selection process. Enter during a heavy revision window, flood it with incompatible narratives around key events, force it to maintain too many branches. You're proposing we brick a cosmic archival system." Salt frowned. "We have no idea what failure looks like. Better that than live under a polished lie." Oxley answered. On my next entry, the pyramid shifted its menu or decided I'd graduated. Early rooms no longer replayed history. They previewed near futures. In one, I walked through a Washington, D.C. that hasn't been built yet. New, low, defensive buildings crowded the mall, in a plaza where a dull office block currently stands in our world, a half-capital-sized black pyramid rooted. People in suits passed beneath it with bored familiarity. Their badges bore the Exogenic Contact Protocol Committee logo. In another, a coastal Asian megacity rose in glass and steel. Transit lines converged on a commercial hub built around a pyramid whose lower faces hosted corporate neon. One scene placed us inside a viewing dome on a Martian plain. Habitat modules crouched under a dusty sky. A smaller pyramid sat beside them under scaffolding while technicians in pressure suits treated it like a research reactor. All those futures felt muted. Fewer riots, fewer wars. People moved with resignation. Dissent hid at the edges of posture and silence. These track best outcomes so far. Cole's voice came through on a secure channel. Lower volatility, fewer mass casualties. The artifact may favor timelines like these. For whom? I asked into the recorder. Frame it as analysis, not argument. Later in my bunk, I compared images of atrocities already fading from public record. Mass graves, bombed neighborhoods, executions in alleys. In some scenarios, those places never existed. In others, they played out smaller. The dead in branches where they fell didn't get a vote on whether their suffering should vanish. I remembered language meetings about collateral damage. The temptation to call a cratered street lightly damaged because collapse stayed on one corner. The urge to label dead civilians possible insurgent sympathizers because the footage looked bad. Back then, I told myself smoothing helped people act. The messy edges stayed in my private folders. Staring at the pyramid through a slit of window, I saw my career as rehearsal for its worldview. The revision storm began roughly 2 weeks after my arrival. By then, everyone near the core project had grown used to minor shifts. New coffee brands sliding into the mess without procurement. Old injuries aching in people who'd never had them here. Childhood schools growing a different mascot in yearbooks. This went beyond that. Sensors around the pyramid, usually busy but readable, spiked. Readouts swung wild. Radios filled with static laced with half-voices speaking languages no one could place. Air shimmered overhead. Birds hitting the perimeter swerved like they'd struck glass. Base comms dropped, then recovered. GPS coordinates for vehicles inside the cordon briefly placed trucks miles away before snapping back. Cole stepped into my workspace with lines I hadn't seen on his face. "We're in a major revision period," he said. "Edits propagate faster and deeper." He set a folder down. Inside, printouts carried urgent reports from across the country. Veterans' halls where old soldiers argued over campaigns whose names changed under their plaques. Families discovering photo albums with extra or missing pictures, children's faces altered halfway through. Memos issued that morning, now bearing different department names, as if reorganizations that should have taken months had happened between coffee breaks. At the same time, Oxley and the anchors pulled me into a rear trailer humming with preparation. Handwritten notes papered the walls, each detailing alternative outcomes. Wars starting in other years, discoveries suppressed or accelerated, assassinations foiled. "Our aim is to swamp its selection process," Kelvin briefed with lab calm. "Teams will enter with narrative packages on key events. In every room, we assert conflicting versions as forcefully as possible, forcing it to hold multiple branches at once. You're betting it can't maintain the load." "We're hoping," Salt corrected. Cole intercepted me on the way to gear. "My side has stakes too," he told me, voice lowered against the chaos. "The DNI compartment values a stable world more than moral hygiene or national advantage. We can live with some of the anchor's preferences, documented war crimes, for example. But we must converge. If your people force a crash, billions live in fracture." You want me between their sabotage and Northcom's power grab. You're the only one the pyramid clearly hears. He met my eyes. I don't know why. Maybe your layered memories light you up. Maybe it likes obsessives. Either way, when choices come, your voice carries. And after? If you survive with extra history intact, we'll find a quiet corner for you. Somewhere your presence doesn't rattle the course. I didn't ask how many quiet corners come with locked doors. We kitted up. My team, Slater, 2 special operators, a neurologist and wireframes himself, carrying a slim device that looked like a cross between a radio and a dictation unit. Remember, Oxley said at the threshold, fingers tight on my arm. If you can, avoid endorsing single lines. Keep Forks alive. If we hold it indecisive, maybe we buy time. Wireframes overheard. Indecision scales into madness, he snapped, composure thinning. You saw that, Sergeant. Multiply him by billions. Both were right in their own frames. We stepped inside. The interior had dropped its polite sequence of separate rooms. We found a looping corridor whose geometry refused mapping, each bend opening into a chamber pulsing with urgency. The first displayed a coup. Soldiers in fatigue stormed a palace that blended several we'd seen. In one branch, they took control cleanly and arrested the ruler. In another, gunfire shredded corridors. The ruler died, and chaos poured into streets. In a third, foreign air power rumbled overhead, and armored vehicles rolled in under another flag. Voices layered, comms, ambient sound, human argument. History records a swift coup, wireframes declared, focusing on the clean version. Minimal casualties, rapid stabilization. Revolutions come with blood, Slater pushed back. Crowds die, buildings burn. That stain shapes the myths. In mine, I added, words arriving before thought. The palace falls, but the worst massacre hits a neighboring district when artillery fires into an unrelated crowd. The new regime inherits that trauma. Insurgency grows out of it. The scene shook. Soldiers hung mid-stride. Flames clung to one balcony while another remained pristine. The ruler flickered between handcuffed, dead, and absent. My mind tried to follow its training and pick one reel. Another part held the conflict, the way I'd learned with misaligned battle feeds. Carvings around us swelled and sank like lungs struggling for rhythm. The pyramid strained against multiplicity. It could display branches. It wanted a choice. Archer, Wireframe's voice cut through. Pick. If you don't, it'll take consensus from everyone else in here, and most of them lack your context. Oxley's earlier plea hissed over comms. Don't ratify. I pictured the sergeant, torn between 2 childhoods. I choose the track where the coup succeeds and the massacre still happens, I said. The regime grabs power with blood on its hands. That shapes its future. The balcony flames snapped into continuity. Screams rose. The ruler vanished from the visible story. Bodies lay scattered in a district away from the palace. Glyphs flared on the walls in patterns we now recognized for record fixed, then cooled. We moved on. Next, a lab with virus samples. In one branch, containment slipped, and a pandemic ripped across the map. In another, a lab tech caught the breach, sealed it, and the outside world never knew. We lived through the pandemic, Wireframes argued. It hardened systems, taught painful lessons. In one branch, I answered. In another, those lessons never arrive because the deaths don't. We have footage, the neurologist added quietly. Mass burials, overloaded ICUs. Those scenes live in your head either way, I said. Your nightmares keep the lesson. The air filled with near futures. In one version, people walked masked through cities. In another, crowds mingled unguarded. I fought the instinct to center my own branch. Instead, I tried for balance. Containment fails in some places and holds in others, I narrated. The world sees enough to understand vulnerability, policy changes, but some regions remain spared. The room settled into a mosaic. Some cities masked, others not. Both histories woven into a single, complicated pattern. Outside our path, glimpses showed the storm's reach. In one alcove, a living room flickered. A family sat at a table while photos on the wall behind them morphed. Children gained and lost a sibling between camera sweeps. Parents aged and smoothed. Through damaged comms, reports came from elsewhere. Regimental plaques updating, someone near the perimeter told us. Campaign names sliding while vets stare at them. Courthouses receiving case files for trials that didn't exist this morning, another voice said. Jury summons printed with department names that came into being during lunch. Inside, every clean, simple statement from any speaker pulled scenes toward one outcome. Every time I insisted that wars freed and enslaved, treaties saved and doomed, the walls hesitated, glyphs churned, and then hybrid scenes took shape. The deeper we pushed toward the metaphorical heart, the more overlays of my own alternate lives pressed in. In one chamber, I watched myself sign divorce papers in a courthouse that doesn't exist here. In another, I saw my body under a flag in a hangar, medal on my chest, the general's face blurred. In another, I lectured about historical mutability to bored students pre-pyramid. Each came with full emotion, shame, relief, regret, brief joy. They rose in waves. Stay with us. Slater's hand dug into my shoulder when I must have stumbled. You can unravel later. I'm busy being several men, I muttered. Wireframes unsnapped his satchel and brought out the device. When we reach the core interface, we feed it a prepared set of narratives, he told me. They maximize coherence and minimize trauma. You affirm them. It already leans toward your framing. Lend it weight, and convergence will follow the template. Oxley's voice crackled through interference. Don't let them spoon-feed it propaganda, he urged. If you can't break it, at least keep its teeth. People need the unvarnished failures. Both sides wanted to use the same lever. Me. We stepped into the final room, or what passed for final. The space stretched in directions my depth perception didn't trust. Shelves receded into hazy distance, each holding suspended scenes. Moments from history, from our lives, from branches we'd walked, all hung mid-gesture like trapped insects. At the center stood a black obelisk, a slim variant of the exterior pyramid. Its surfaces crawled with living carvings. Everything in me that knew editing suites recognized this as console. Wireframes took one step forward, thumb hovering over his device switch. Daniel. First time he'd used my first name. You know what an uncontrolled crash does. Mine's like that sergeant's, multiplied. Families split across drafts. There's a reason for a preferred course. Peace built on sand still sinks, Oxley's faint voice whispered. You've spent your life cutting reality to fit power. Don't build them the tool of tools. The ghosts don't get a vote, Wireframes pressed. 8 billion living people do. Do you want them half mad? The obelisk's carvings had stilled, lines arranged into branch markers, correction ticks, a glyph we still hadn't cracked that loomed over the rest. It waited. I thought of the rural sergeant fingering scars from 2 incompatible childhoods. I thought of the captain whose brain had spent years making peace with a missing arm that now existed. I thought of the family whose photos rewrote their children mid-frame. I also thought of mass graves, of testimonies I'd watched where women described things no one should endure, and later watched their tormentors die in comfort, history smoothing their names. Crashing the system might tear reality into patches. People would live half-attached, arguing over which bodies belonged in which wars. Giving full control to Wireframe's script would polish away entire categories of guilt. I couldn't stomach either. Give me the script, I told him. I'll use it. I'll also edit it. He hesitated, then passed the device over. Desperation and trust shared his gaze. The script held prompts. The conflict in Region A ends with Treaty B. The pandemic comes once and is contained. Certain atrocities never escalate. I read, and where lines shaved too much away, I pushed back. The conflict in Region A ends with Treaty B, I began. The treaty favors the victors and seeds resentment. Civilians suffer. The world remembers their faces. Glyphs brightened and dimmed. The pandemic comes once and is contained, I continued. It kills many before that containment. Their names remain. Failures that allowed spread stay documented in full. Each time I forced detail back in, the carvings resisted, then yielded. Oxley's faint cheers crackled through, tinged with fear over what compromises I still made. When the text tried to erase entire horrors, I refused. Genocidal campaigns occur, I said, addressing the obelisk. Their mechanisms and origins remain clear. No government or movement that drives them gets a clean lineage. Descendants live free of guilt. The archive still records what was done in their name. Where the script crowned the United States as tidy shepherd, I hedged. The United States remains a major power, I read. It exerts influence, generous and coercive. Its record shows victories and failures. It doesn't ascend as flawless guardian or collapsed tyrant. It remains one actor among several. The room shuddered, shelves wobbled, scenes slid along their places like books shoved down a line. The obelisk blurred, then snapped still. Something deep in my bones felt rails lock into one track after a yard of switches. Outside channels, voices steadied. My medals stopped morphing, someone laughed, close to tears. Plaque's the same every time now. The obelisk displayed one last projected scene. The Mojave site, much as we knew it, pyramid under layered guard. Around the globe, other black structures sat behind fences and research rigs, not yet integrated into malls or Martian suburbs. We weren't getting the mall pyramid future. We weren't getting a total crash. We'd landed on something in between. The glyphs froze in patterns Oxley would later trace. Inside my head, the other Daniels quieted. Not erased, layered. Their deaths, divorces and degrees settled into strata, still reachable, no longer all trying to speak at once. We stepped back into desert air. The sky looked exactly as before. That meant nothing by itself. The difference showed in the steadier way people's eyes held. The captain kept both arms. The sergeant remembered barbed wire and not much else, though he complained of a lingering feeling that something important sat just out of reach. The flag's star count stayed wrong to me, but the number stopped changing. Maps and textbooks agreed on one set of histories. Not the ones I grew up with. Not the sanitized version DNI wanted. Jagged, haunted, coherent enough for traffic. They pulled me off the front quietly. On paper, I received a commendation for a complex information operation and a transfer to a new posting in the capital. The letter favored phrases like strategic insight and exceptional narrative resilience. The commendation lived in a file hardly anyone would ever open. In the stabilized branch, the Exogenic Contact Protocol Committee existed as a small, underfunded office in a bland building. It handled anomalous artifacts, wrote white papers few read, and hosted conferences about cross-domain governance. My new role came with a nondescript title and a window over a concrete courtyard. My badge carried no black program markings. Everyone who mattered knew which hallways my name haunted. Officially, I reviewed incident reports about possible pyramid activity, flagged hoaxes, and filed them. Unofficially, a small inner ring treated me as a canary. If reality twitches, we expect you to feel it first, Cole said during one of our last talks at Mojave. Trust your discomfort. You're attuned now. One way to phrase it. Another, broken in a useful pattern. Psych evals followed like shadows. Some came from people I never met. Their language worked hard to sound humane. Subject functions adequately in daily tasks despite retaining multiple layers of autobiographical memory from divergent branches, one summary read. He distinguishes current history from alternates, though emotional bleed persists. Intrusive cross-branch recall represents both hazard and potential early warning signal. Recommend monitoring. Aggressive therapeutic intervention risks eliminating utility. Put simpler, Still not quite moored, but too handy to fix. In quiet hours, I wandered my inner stack of lives. The Daniel who died under steel, the one who married and wrecked it, the one who wrote papers instead of field reports. They lived there as closed roads with visible landscapes. Outside, the world moved. Pyramids, plural, entered official vocabulary as classified anomalies everyone knew about. Mojave, a Central Asia site, one under Antarctic ice. Joint oversight regimes formed. International teams guarded each structure like a cross between a bomb and a shrine. Public narratives framed them as relics of some unknown civilization, or as natural geometric oddities. Their editorial nature stayed buried. At conferences, people showed slides of metastable lithic structures with colorful diagrams that described shelves I'd walked past. None of them new. Legislation banned construction too close to pyramids, prohibited commercial branding, blocked direct civilian networks from touching their internals. That was the letter. I had no illusions about covert work. Sometimes an incident file landed on my desk. A veteran in Kansas dreaming detailed battles that never occurred in this branch, waking with intimate knowledge of a weapon no one had built here. A woman in Brazil seeking therapy for grief over a daughter she no longer had, whose face nonetheless populated her childhood memories, complete with specific scraped-knee stories. Each time recognition flickered. Burrs from discarded drafts. I couldn't tell them the truth. The people who watched me wouldn't allow that, and I doubted dropping the archive on someone's lap did much good. Instead, I nudged those cases toward therapists who understood ambiguous loss and strange identity shifts. I read anonymized follow-ups, watching which approaches soothed. On leave, I drove to Mojave. The base remained trimmed but intact. Fewer Northcom crests, more international patches. The pyramid still sat in its cut, faces black, carvings in frozen motion. From outside the final fence, only its upper half showed. That was by design. Fences high enough to keep it from becoming a roadside attraction. I leaned on the rail and imagined glyphs I couldn't see. Oxley's latest work, buried in a classified annex, mapped glyph clusters marking outcomes where internal agents interfered. Our world carried several. We counted as partial convergence, not full success. Somewhere in the archive, our entry probably reads, Planetary File N, Convergence Incomplete, Internal Narrative Agents Adjusted Preferred Course, Residual Multiplicity Tolerated. Some days, that comforts me. On bad ones, I wonder if I chose the lesser evil or just forced everyone to share my hungers, for accuracy over ease, for scars over smooth skin. Did I keep history's wounds visible because it was right, or because I couldn't bear a world that didn't mirror the weight inside me? Branches exist where Daniel Archer chose differently. I feel them as pressure headaches when I close my eyes too long. Versions of me reading wireframe script word for word and ushering in the gentle branch. Others throwing in with Kelvin and Oxley, riding a crash into fractured reality. Some died under sliding stone. Some never heard of pyramids. News still shows wars, though fewer, and disasters and scandals. Somewhere inside those stories, echoes from discarded drafts linger because I made the obelisk hold them. I still fix narratives. Once, that meant trimming raw footage into something that would survive court and evening news. Now it means living in a world whose spine I helped set, knowing I can't show anyone the editor's track. On one visit to Mojave, I stayed later than my escort liked. The sun slid down. Heat bled off. The desert's sounds thinned. At the fence, I rested my arms on the top rail and watched the pyramid. A truck door thumped. Boots approached. Cole came to stand beside me, now in civilian clothes, tie loosened. "Still checking the seams?" he asked. "Checking if the set feels like it'll hold," I answered. "And?" "For now, the paint sticks. The extras hit their marks. The leads remember enough of the old script to sell the scene." He huffed. "We've got new glyph analysis," he mentioned. "Confirms what we suspected. Worlds like ours. Partial interference, rough convergence, aren't common, but they aren't unique. The archive has seen stubborn locals before. How did those end? In some, the preferred course flexed and accepted extra mess. In others, the editors tagged them for re-evaluation after decay. He looked out at the black faces. Think of it as a note to check back in a few hundred or thousand years. You're full of sunshine. He shrugged. You did what you thought you had to. So did I. So did everyone who spoke in there. There's no moral victory here. Just outcomes. We watched the pyramid, two men who'd helped it choose and had to live in the shadow. Somewhere, I told the structure more than Cole, there's a clean world where people tell simple stories. The pyramids arrived, made things better, left, and everyone learned the right lessons. And somewhere else, he said, picking it up, the stories never settle. People remember half a dozen lives. No two maps agree. Every war sits in quotation marks. We landed between, I said. For now. He checked his phone and scowled. I have to talk a senator out of building a visitor center at the Great Plains site. Apparently tourism needs a boost. He left me at the fence. Alone with the pyramid, I let my mind wander. I pictured its catalogue. Shelves of worlds, neat marks for preferred courses, special glyphs for troublesome cases. Somewhere a line probably mentions Archer, Daniel, internal narrative agent, contributed to partial convergence, remains unstable. In that ledger, my work amounts to a note. Here, it burned me open and left me in a world that feels right and wrong at the same time. I don't know if I did well. I know that, when asked to choose between lying cleanly for power and shattering sanity in the name of truth, I aimed for a story that hurts and still holds. That's what I've always done. Elsewhere, in branches I can still feel, other Daniels picked other versions and never know this one exists. I know them. I carry them like old case files, labelled, cross-referenced, never fully discarded. It's not much comfort. It's no lesson. It's just the record I have to live with.